In the far future, there is only war. The galaxy is a broken echo of its former self, scarred by millennia of ceaseless conflict, ruled by the Imperium of man, a vast, decaying empire stretching across 1,000,000 worlds. At its heart lies Terra, ancient Earth, now little more than a fortress temple to a dying god. That god is the Emperor. 10,000 years ago, he led humanity through the Great Crusade, uniting the scattered colonies of mankind under a single banner. He was no mere ruler. He was a being of unimaginable power, born in the fires of ancient psychic rituals, the culmination of humanity's collective will to survive. He created the Primarchs, 20 superhuman sons, each the embodiment of a part of his own genius and wrath. They were generals, kings, and saviors. From their genes, he forged the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, warrior monks clad in power armor, fanatical and unstoppable. But before the Imperium could be completed, treachery tore it apart. Horus, the favored son, was corrupted by the Chaos Gods, malignant entities that dwelled within the warp, a parallel dimension of psychic energy. He turned half the legions against the Emperor in the Horus heresy. Brother fought brother, worlds burned, and at the siege of Terra in the heart of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor struck down Horus. But it cost him his mortal form. Now he sits upon the golden throne, a withered husk sustained by arcane machinery and the sacrifice of thousands of souls each day. His spirit endures, guiding humanity through the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon in the warp. The Imperium survives, but it does not thrive. It is an empire of stagnation, held together by faith, war, and terror. Its priests speak of the Emperor as a god, and his angels, the Space Marines, wage endless war against the Xenos, the mutant, and the heretic. Chaos remains an ever-present threat. The warp is alive. It whispers, corrupts. Its gods are eternal. Korn, lord of blood and rage. Sench, master of change and deceit. Nurgle, god of rot and despair. And Slaanesh, prince of pleasure and excess. Their champions lead twisted legions, the Chaos Space Marines, once noble brothers now warped into monsters. Beyond chaos, alien empires rise. The orcs, green-skinned brutes who live for war, infest systems like a plague. Their laughter echoes across battlefields, crude weapons tearing apart entire battalions. The Eldar, ancient and dying, drift through the stars aboard vast craft worlds. Their psychically attuned warriors and farcers fight to preserve what little remains of their doomed race. The Tyranids come from beyond the galaxy, an all-consuming swarm of biomass, guided by the hive mind. They devour worlds whole, leaving nothing but dust and silence. The Necrons awaken from millennia of slumber, soulless machines from an age before time, wielding weapons that defy understanding. And in the shadows, the Tau Empire expands with cold logic and high technology, offering the greater good, even as they prepare their fleets for conquest. Across this dark galaxy, countless wars rage. The Space Marines strike from orbit, their drop pods slamming into battlefield like thunderbolts. The Imperial Guard holds the line with flesh and steel. The Adeptus Mechanicus unearth forbidden knowledge, their tech priests chanting binary prayers to machines they barely comprehend. Every day, 1 billion souls are born, and 1 billion more perish. There is no peace, no respite, no mercy, only war. And yet, within the darkness, heroes rise. Saint Celestine, the living saint, alights upon battlefields with wings of flame. Robot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, returned from stasis to lead the Imperium once more. Inquisitors root out heresy wherever it hides, wielding absolute authority. And beneath it all, the Emperor dreams, waiting, guiding, until the end. or a new beginning, Robot Guilliman strode the galaxy once more. Awakened in the darkest hour, when the Imperium teetered on the brink, he beheld a realm he scarcely recognized. Where once had been order and conquest, now lay superstition and rot. Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, son of the Emperor, now bore the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium. He forged the Indomitus Crusade, a vast military campaign spanning thousands of worlds. The Crusade's purpose was singular: to reclaim lost territory, stabilize the Imperium, and stem the tide of chaos that poured through the cicatrix maledictum, the Great Rift. The rift had torn reality itself. A yawning wound across the galaxy, it split the Imperium in two. One half basked in the light of the Astronomicon, while the other, Imperium Nihilus, was cast into shadow. Communication faltered. Warp storms raged. Demonic incursions multiplied. Planets fell silent, never to speak again. But Guilliman brought light to the darkness. With him came the Primera Space Marines, taller, stronger, faster. Created by Archmagos Belisarius Call from the Emperor's ancient designs, these warriors were the future of the Adeptus Astartes. Entire chapters were reforged. New legions marched from the great forges of Mars. Not all accepted them. Some chapters viewed the Primaris as abominations, questioning the right of meddling hands to shape the Emperor's design. But necessity crushed doubt. The galaxy burned, and there was no time for purity. Chaos surged. The despoiler returned. Abaddon the Warmaster, heir to Horus, launched the 13th Black Crusade. Cadia fell beneath his wrath. The Eye of Terror, long dormant, now seethed with demonic energy. The Black Legion marched. Worlds collapsed. Loyalists bled, but they did not break. Across the stars, Guilliman built bastions of hope. Fortress worlds were raised. The Adeptus Custodes, once confined to the Emperor's palace, now strode the stars in gleaming gold, the last of the old guard finally unleashed. But hope was fragile. In the darkness, the Tyranids evolved. The hive fleets of Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan gave rise to splinters that could not be predicted. Their synaptic webs learned, adapted, turned defeats into future annihilation. The psychic scream of the hive mind warped entire sectors. The Necrons stirred further. Silent tombs cracked open on forgotten moons. Lords of metal and madness emerged, some seeking empire, others vengeance. The Silent King returned from exile, a figure of dread and intent. He spoke of a greater threat, one that even the Necrons feared. And deep beneath the warp, something stirred. Not a god, not a demon, but hunger given form. The old ones were gone, their war against the Necrons and the warp-spawned horrors lost to myth. But echoes of their science still lingered, and now ancient mechanisms blinked to life. Portals opened, vaults hissed. The galaxy had become a chessboard of extinction. On one front, the Tau pressed outward, annexing systems with diplomacy and drone-guided conquest. Their reach was small, but their ambition vast. And behind their smiles lay the puppet strings of the ethereals, hidden masters with silent commands. On another, the Drukhari struck from Kamarak, feeding on suffering, stealing lives for perverse rituals. Their laughter was razors in the void, and the warp howled louder. The birth of the Great Rift had shaken the Chaos Gods themselves. New champions rose. Mortarion, demon primarch of the Death Guard, unleashed plagues across entire sectors. Magnus the Red, sorcerer king of the Thousand Suns, sought forbidden knowledge buried even the gods dared not touch. Yet Guilliman endured. He reformed the Imperium's bureaucracy. He restructured failing systems. He spoke to the High Lords with authority none had wielded since the Emperor fell silent. But he did not believe, not in the godhood of his father. He saw the ecclesiarchy's zealotry as poison. He bore the hypocrisy of faith with clenched fists. And in quiet chambers, he asked the unspoken question: if the emperor is divine, why did he not stop this? There was no answer. Only the endless march of boots across steel, the hymnals of war, the burning of cities, and the silence of deep space. This is the age of the Dark Imperium, and its night is far from over. In the haunted silence of the galaxy's forgotten edges, a whisper traveled faster than any fleet, more enduring than any machine: prophecy. Among the Eldar, the seers of Ulthwi gazed into the swirling depths of the skein. Their minds stretched across time and possibility. What they saw chilled them: a future of absolute silence, where neither god nor demon stirred, where even the light of stars had dimmed. They called it the Ranadandra, the final battle where all threads of fate would converge. But before that end, there would be wars unnumbered. On Vigilus, a world torn by its position on the edge of the Great Rift, war erupted on every level. Beneath the hive cities, Genestealer cults prepared for ascension, their four-armed patriarchs whispering dreams of salvation. Above, the forces of chaos bombarded the surface, while loyalist space marines, including the vaunted Ultramarines and Black Templars, formed last lines of defense. The Vigilus campaign became a template for the New Age: desperate, multi-fronted, and without mercy. Even as Guilliman directed vast crusades, his enemies multiplied. Fabius Bile, the twisted apothecary of the Emperor's children, perfected his grotesque experiments. He played with the genomes of Primaris Marines, seeking to craft a new master race, loyal only to him. From the shadows, he watched Guilliman's new legions with perverse interest, collecting samples like trophies. Elsewhere, Lorger's prophecies gained fresh traction. Though the word-bearers had long since scattered, their belief that chaos was not merely power, but divine truth, began to poison fresh minds. On feudal worlds, knightly orders fell to worship of dark pantheons. Entire systems were lost without a single shot, as cults rose like wildfire beneath the noses of planetary governors. The warp's influence deepened. Where once travel was perilous, now it was impossible. Whole fleets vanished. Astropaths screamed and bled from the eyes. Even the Emperor's tarot gave no guidance. The Imperium Nihilus, cut off from the Astronomicon, became a land of phantoms and myths. Heroes became legends, and legends were swallowed by night. On one such world, a lone sister of battle, Canoness Seth Eno, led a starving regiment of PDF, surviving by faith alone. Her image, caught by a wandering servoskull, traveled back across impossible distances to reach Terra. She became a symbol, prayer made flesh. The ecclesiarchy canonized her before her death was even confirmed. Hope, however thin, persisted. Mars itself became a battleground. The Fabricator General, Kelbier Hal's successors, had long struggled to contain schisms within the Adeptus Mechanicus. The cult of the Omnicia fractured, with new sects emerging, some preaching unity with Xeno's machine spirits, others whispering that the true machine god lay imprisoned deep beneath Noctis Labyrinthus. Belisarius' call, seen by some as a prophet, by others as a heretic, vanished for years at a time, only to return bearing technologies that defied understanding. Rumors circulated of a second STC archive, one he refused to share. Inquisitors, ever vigilant, debated whether Call served the Emperor or a deeper agenda. The Ordo Xenos, Ordo Malleus, and Ordo Hereticus each had agents tailing his every move, yet none dared openly strike. The power he wielded and the legions he could awaken were deterrents few wished to test. Meanwhile, the Necrons unveiled horrors older than the warp itself. The Silent King, Zarek, gathered dynasties once thought lost. Beneath dead stars and shattered moons, ancient tombships rose. Where once the Necrons warred amongst themselves, now they acted with terrifying unity. Their goal was not conquest alone, but the silencing of the warp, an extermination of the very fabric upon which chaos fed. To accomplish this, they began activating the pylons, arcane constructs of unimaginable power, capable of nullifying warp energies. The Imperium took note, so did the demons. Fights erupted not only for planets, but for the soul of reality itself. And beyond the galactic rim, the hive fleets gathered. Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, Hydra, and new, unclassified patterns moved with uncanny intelligence. Bioships merged. Strains blended. For the first time, the hive mind seemed to hold back, as if learning, preparing. On the edge of Ultima Segmentum, a black sphere of void swallowed entire fleets without trace. From its heart came no signal, only a rhythmic pulsing in the warp, like a heartbeat. Some began to whisper of a fifth chaos god, born not of emotion, but of despair itself. The Inquisition denied it. The Black Library offered no confirmation, but the Eldari Farcers began to weep. And somewhere, in the deepest core of Terra, the golden throne flickered for a single moment. A spark, a warning, or a beginning. The galaxy burned as the cicatrix maledictum widened. Rifts tore through space and time, and entire systems vanished into screaming voids. The warp poured into real space like blood through shattered glass. Planets twisted, moons broke apart, and even stars flickered beneath the pressure. No one was safe, not even the throne world itself. Terra, sacrosanct and immovable, shuddered under psychic storms. The Astronomicon dimmed more frequently now, and each blackout was accompanied by visions of terror. Spectral legions marching on burning skies, shadowed colossi rising from oceans of blood, and an ancient voice echoing in the dark, "All thrones shall fall." And yet the Imperium endured. The Indomitus Crusade, spearheaded by Robert Guilliman, became not just a military campaign but a spiritual battle for the soul of humanity. Where he went, order followed. New Primaris chapters were seeded across the stars, each a blade in the darkness. Yet Guilliman saw too well that his vision of rational empire had crumbled in the millennia since his stasis. Mankind no longer followed the dream of unity, followed fear. He stood alone among gods and corpses. Even among his surviving brothers, there was no certainty. Lion L. Johnson had awakened in the ruins of the Rock, his return kept secret by the inner circle of the Dark Angels. Silent and brooding, he hunted traitors through the shadow of Imperium Nihilus, leaving only justice and scorched ground in his wake. Others were whispered to stir. Rumors of the Khan riding the storms near Kagurus, of Vulcan reforging war gear deep within Nocturne's burning core, of Coryx, a living shadow, waging silent war within the Eye of Terror itself. But nothing was certain. The traitor Primarchs remained powerful and resurgent. Mortarian's death guard spread plagues uncurable, corrupting entire subsectors with their pustulant gifts. Typhus, the herald of Nurgle, carved a path through Imperial space, his fleet of zombie ships trailing clouds of death. Magnus the Red, bitter and radiant, wove impossible spells from atop the spires of Prospero rebuilt. He sought forbidden truths, believing his father a fraud and his destiny unfulfilled. And the War Master, Abaddon the Despoiler, still wielding the blade Drachnian and clad in Terminator armor forged in the depths of the warp, unleashed the full fury of the Black Legion. No longer simply the shadow of Horus, he was his own monster now. His 13th Black Crusade shattered Cadia, and the remnants of that defiance echoed across every corner of the galaxy. But perhaps the most terrifying truth was this: Cadia fell, and yet mankind did not. This lesson, the tenacity of the human spirit, shook even the great enemy. In the depths of the webway, the Harlequins danced new performances. The laughing god grew quiet. Iniad, the Eldari god of the dead, stirred in the slumber of the Inari's rituals. Ivrain, prophetess and wielder of strange life-death energies, sought allies across the stars, forging uneasy truces with craftworlders and even desperate human commanders. And the Tau, emboldened by their mysterious allies in the shadows, pushed further into contested space. Their fifth sphere of expansion moved with unnerving precision. Their technology improved, and their grasp of the warp, once non-existent, began to deepen in ways even they could not explain. Ethereal spoke of whispers from the stars. Something watched them. Something smiled. Aboard the Blackstone fortresses, ancient weapons long dormant roared to life. Warpcraft and reality combined in devastating arrays. One fortress was lost to madness. Another vanished entirely. The third opened fire on a planet of the Ecclesiarchy, annihilating it in one silent pulse. The age of apostasy returned in miniature across the Imperium. Conflicting interpretations of the imperial creed sparked war between cardinals. The Ecclesiarch Decius Ziv called for unity and sacrifice, but behind him, power brokers within the Ministorm prepared their own agendas. And beneath all of it, the Golden Throne systems began to fail more frequently. The Adeptus Custodes increased their vigilance. The Sisters of Silence returned in greater number, psychic nulls that moved like ghosts across the battlefield. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, arcane rituals and forgotten technologies worked endlessly to keep the Emperor bound to life. Some whispered he was waking, others feared he was dying. And in that uncertainty, across a million worlds, the drums of war thundered louder. New heroes rose, some sanctioned, others not. Rogue traders led crusades beyond the reach of maps. Battle sisters uncovered heresies that turned into revolutions. Tech priests defied Mars and forged their own forge worlds among the stars. The galaxy no longer turned in any order. It churned. And somewhere, in that churning, a storm began to speak. Not with sound, but with will. The will that stirred within the storm was not new. It had waited. Since the old night, since the first races dared chart the void and name the stars, it had watched from behind the veil. Not merely chaos, not merely the echoes of emotion made manifest, but something deeper, an intelligence without face or origin, born not of thought but of the cracks between thoughts. The cicatrix male dictum was its gateway, a breach through which its whispers could become song. In the region known as the Pariah Nexus, reality itself buckled. Time flowed inconsistently, emotions dulled, warp travel collapsed. Even demons recoiled from its borders. This was no mere phenomenon. This was design. Here, the Necrons and their ancient masters laid the groundwork for a future where the warp would no longer matter, where the galaxy could be silenced, where chaos would starve. To the Silent King Zarek, this was salvation. He saw what the Old Ones had wrought, what the warp had become, and he knew it must end. With the dynasties reawakened, his plan moved swiftly. Tomb worlds lit their skies with anti-warp beacons. Tan shards, fractured star gods, were turned to engines of annihilation. And everywhere his fleets went, they brought silence. But silence bred terror. The Imperium dispatched the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Death Watch, and entire fleets to investigate. Most never returned. Those who did came back altered, drained of faith, of memory, of humanity. The Inquisition placed embargoes on knowledge. The Ordo Chronos broke their silence. Something had touched the flow of time itself. On the edge of this silence, the Indomitus fleets hesitated. Even Gilliman, armed with divine purpose and the will of his father's empire, found himself uncertain. The battles fought in the Pariah Nexus made no sense. Tactical doctrines failed. Reinforcements vanished. Even victory tasted hollow. Yet deeper still, he pressed on, believing that behind the veil, there must be understanding. But others believed differently. The Adeptus Sororitas began to speak of false saints, individuals performing miracles without faith, raising the dead, turning aside demon blades, but never invoking the emperor. The ecclesiarchy declared them heretics. The people declared them saviors. And through it all, the Black Legion moved unseen. No longer simply conquerors, they became saboteurs of truth. Abaddon dispatched his lieutenants to plant seeds of doubt and discontent across loyalist worlds. Chaos cults evolved, no longer merely mad or violent, but organized, philosophical, seductive. They offered a galaxy of purpose, not madness. Even within the ranks of the Astra Militarum, cells formed. Commissars executed entire regiments, only to discover the taint went higher. Imperial knights turned on their households. Navigators drew symbols into their flesh and opened doors better left shut. The warp howled, then quieted. A new force arrived, unseen, unheralded. From the black between stars, vessels of non-Euclidean shape emerged. Unknown Xenos, or perhaps something older than Xenos. Their weapons untraceable, their motives unknowable. They struck only once, in the Vortum Reach, annihilating an entire Black Templars crusade and then vanishing. The only clue left behind was a symbol carved into the void itself, a spiral. Some claimed it to be a mark of the old ones returned, others of the end. And then came the awakening. Across 100,000 worlds, Psychers screamed in unison. Astropaths fell dead at their stations. The warp recoiled, twisted, then surged. Portents became truth. Prophecies ignited. And from the depths of Terra, the golden throne pulsed with light. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor of Mankind moved. It was slight, a flicker of hand, a shift of gaze, but it was enough. The Adeptus Custodes fell to their knees. The Sisters of Silence wept. Tech priests despaired, for no system had registered the movement. It was not mechanical, not psychic. It was divine. And Gilliman, a galaxy away, knew it in his heart. Hope ignited, and in that hope, the Imperium surged forward. But chaos too saw. Mordorion gathered his plague hosts and prepared a new offensive, one not of war, but of entropy. Magnus called out to Tsench for knowledge forbidden even to gods. Angron bled worlds dry, and Lorgar, ever silent, wrote a new scripture, one line repeated endlessly. He rises, and we shall bring him low. The final act had not yet come, but the stage was built. And the audience, mortal and immortal, waited with breath held and weapons drawn. The void trembled with anticipation. In the depths of Segmentum Pacificus, the stars themselves seemed to flicker as warp storms grew still, not with peace, but with the coiling tension of a storm waiting to strike. From the ruins of shattered forge worlds and the broken husks of once proud battle barges, came silence that screamed louder than any siren. It was in this silence that the great convergence began. On the world of Arxoth Prime, a dead planet with no breathable atmosphere and a core half consumed by ancient mining drills, a circle of inquisitors met. Representatives of every ordo, Malleus, Xenos, Hereticus, Kronos, and the shadowy redacted, each bore secrets forbidden even to name. Their meeting was unrecorded, their words unspoken by machine or mind, but their decisions rippled through time itself. The conclusion was unanimous. The galaxy stood at the cusp not of rebirth or destruction, but transformation. And none could say into what. As the Inquisition braced for the unknowable, a ripple moved through the Eldar webway. Ivrain, the prophetess of Iniad, wept blood as she gazed into the mirrored future. Visions of a reborn god were replaced by something darker, a death not of gods, but of all belief. Craft worlds dimmed their lights, their spirit stones pulsing with unease. The Harlequins vanished from known paths, chasing some forgotten script in the halls of the Black Library. The Eldari knew the galaxy would not end. It would change until it was no longer recognizable. Meanwhile, the Tau Empire expanded quietly, undisturbed by the nightmares plaguing others. But this peace was unnatural. Ethereal councils reported strange behavior in their castes. Sudden religious fervor, artwork depicting stars bleeding, and new philosophies that spoke of a greater silence, not a greater good. Some began to meditate not to the stars, but to something between them. On the eastern fringe, the hive fleets converged. From three separate vectors, Kraken's remnants, Leviathan's core, and an unclassified strand moving faster than light itself, the Tyranids formed patterns resembling strategy. They avoided battles. They circled warp storms. They appeared to be searching, and when they found it, a derelict black moon orbiting nothing, they did not consume. They stopped, waited, and then retreated. The Ordo Xenos called it unprecedented. The Muggos Biologists called it impossible. But one inquisitor, Kara Ithil, whispered a truth that few dared consider. Even the hive mind fears. On Terra, the Astronomicon pulsed irregularly. The Emperor's presence grew erratic. Some pilgrims burst into flame mid-prayer. Others rose into the air, eyes glowing, uttering prophecies in languages extinct since the dawn of man. The Adeptus Custodes doubled their vigilance. The High Lords of Terra fell into paranoia. Then came the vision. Across the galaxy, hundreds of psychers dreamed the same dream. A throne shattered, a god chained in golden light, and a key forged of pain. The dream ended with a single word, burned into their waking minds. Unmaker. It was not chaos. It was not Xenos. It was not man. It was something else. In the halo stars, a region long declared forbidden, sensors picked up impossible readings. Structures orbiting dead suns, geometries that shifted when observed. A black ship sent to investigate never returned. The last message it transmitted was not in any known language, but when decoded phonetically, it sang a lullaby. One that children on Terra had sung for 10,000 years. And so the Imperium prepared, not for war alone, but for revelation. For the possibility that the galaxy's horror was not its end, but its beginning. The Primarchs, those few who still walked among the stars, felt it too. Guilliman prayed without knowing why. Mortarion bled from every pore and laughed. Magnus screamed at the skies, tearing his own flesh for silence. Lorgar knelt, and in the eye of terror something old remembered its name. Not a demon, not a god, but a shadow-given thought. Its name was not known, but its purpose was clear: to end everything that remembered what the galaxy used to be, and to begin what came after. The galaxy groaned beneath the weight of its own secrets. In the depthless dark between galactic arms, where no light shone and no maps dared reach, a signal pulsed, ancient, monotonic, calling not to life but to memory. It was picked up first by Mechanicus deep scanners in the Halo Zone, then by the black ships of the Inquisition, and finally by a forgotten relay station in Segmentum Obscurus, long presumed destroyed. The message was clear, even as its language defied every known cipher. Reclamation begins. The Adeptus Mechanicus panicked. Hidden conclaves debated in binary cant faster than thought, yet none could determine the signal's source. No STC template matched its cadence. It spoke not in machine code or logic, but in something far older predata. And then, across 10,000 dead Forge worlds, things began to wake. Not Necron, not man, but something that had once been both and neither. They called themselves the Ophiuchans. Serpentine in form, crystalline in structure, they emerged from vaults buried deeper than planetary cores. Each one was a library, a warrior, a psalm of war and thought entwined. Their weapons sang rather than fired. Their armor shimmered with timelines instead of alloys. They made no demands. They simply began rebuilding, and planets reshaped themselves around them. The Imperium, already stretched thin by crusades and revolts, could not comprehend the scale. Inquisitors vanished in their presence. Primaris Marines fell in dreamless sleep before their weapons could rise. Even demons recoiled, one greater demon of Slainish evaporated mid-laugh. The Ophiuchans did not conquer. They replaced. Entire populations awoke with rewritten histories. Hologlyphic schools taught children that the Ophiuchans had always ruled. Saint statues wept mercury and changed form. Astartes monuments now bore unfamiliar sigils. Guilliman, furious, ordered exterminatus. Failed. Cyclonic torpedoes detonated. Worlds split. But in the aftershock, the Ophiuchans reformed. Not as bodies, but as stories, as archetypes. A children's rhyme on one world became a defense matrix. A folk tale from a hive moon summoned a barrier of crystalline reason. Sench watched and whispered, "Even I do not know this game." The warp dimmed. Across the galaxy, the cicatrix male dictum began to thin, not from outside, but from within. Where once the maelstrom roared, now silence reigned. Demon worlds flickered like mirages. The Black Crusades faltered. Abaddon himself retreated, carving runes into his own flesh, searching for meaning. And from the deepest pits of old Terra, the Emperor spoke again. Not through light, through dream. Millions of psychers awoke screaming a single phrase. The garden closes. On the world of Lapis 9, the Adepta Sororitas held vigil over a shrine long considered dormant. One night, the stained glass above the altar shattered inward, and a child with no eyes emerged. She spoke in 10,000 voices. With each word, the nuns forgot their names. She simply said, "He dreams a new war." And then she turned to ash. Meanwhile, the Ophiuchans formed a circle across stars. 12 systems bound by light and math. They called it the Spiral Covenant. Inside it, no warp travel functioned. No. Memory persisted longer than a day. But the Ophiuchans remained, sculpting a throne not of gold, but of time. It was not a challenge. It was a replacement. And the Imperium, for all its might, did not know what to fight. The Necrons attempted an alliance, only to be unraveled by forgotten equations encoded into their own tomb software. The Eldar vanished from real space, their craft worlds turning inward. Some whispered they fled into dream itself. The Tyranids circled the Spiral Covenant, but did not strike. Instead, they waited, and the stars whispered a final omen. The last war will not be fought with blades or belief, but with the right to be remembered. The galaxy stood still, and in the silence, a new beginning stirred, not with fire, but with forgetting. Not with death, but with erasure. The Warhammer galaxy would end, not in annihilation, but in a war against oblivion itself. They came in silence. From the edge of the Spiral Covenant, from the borders of what remained of the Imperium, from the cracked folds of the warp itself, they emerged, figures cloaked in entropy, neither machine nor demon nor flesh. Their forms shimmered like broken code glimpsed through ancient vidscreens. They bore no banners, spoke no names, claimed no allegiance. But in their wake, systems collapsed. They were the nullborn. Each one existed as the absence of all things: gravity, time, memory. Ships that encountered them returned not damaged, but incomplete. Whole sectors of experience vanished. Officers forgot they had ever left orbit. Children aged into dust. Planets mourned species that had never evolved. The nullborn were not an army. They were the symptom of a universe unraveling. Within the spiral covenant, the Ophiuchans stood vigil. Their circle of light, their constructed reality of harmony and logic, was meant to hold against all invaders. But the nullborn did not invade. They dissolved. One by one, the 12 systems dimmed. Not exploded, not destroyed, dimmed. As if their light had grown tired. As if their stories had ended without being told. In desperation, the Ophiuchans initiated the second cycle, a rewriting of their own timeline, a reset within the spiral. Failed. The nullborn were immune to cycles. In the depths of Terra, the golden throne pulsed no more. The Emperor's divine spark flickered, not into death, but into diffusion. He was no longer a god chained to flesh. He was a presence spread thin across the veil, speaking now in instinct, in gravity, in the choice of a soldier hesitating to fire. Guilliman stood alone in the ruins of Baal, watching the stars fade. Not from sight, but from memory. He struggled to recall the name of his brothers, the shape of his father's face, the sound of bolter fire. He knew this was the true war, the war to preserve meaning. The Mechanicus, in desperation, activated the Omnibastion Protocol, an apocalyptic failsafe intended to reboot the new sphere of mankind. Across Mars and its forged satellites, data psalms rang out like cries to a drowning god. They summoned fragments of STCs, lost logic engines, half-alive scrap code. The Omnibastion created an echo, a resonance field of belief. And for a moment, the nullborn paused. It was enough. The Sisters of Silence gathered across ancient shrines. Wordlessly, they stood in formation upon shrines that no longer bore names. They did not pray. They remembered. Their silent contemplation radiated purpose, resisting the pull of forgetfulness. And still, the nullborn came. In the eye of terror, where chaos once reigned unchallenged, the warp itself bent away. Demon worlds cracked open, exposing rot within rot. Abaddon turned to face the void and found no enemy. The gods of chaos screamed in unheard languages. Slaanesh faded first, unable to feed. Khorne's throne rusted. Tzeentch collapsed into recursive thought. Nurgle alone wept, nurturing a final hope in a garden that no longer bloomed. Because even decay requires memory. The Harlequins of the Eldar told the last tale. A dance performed on a dying moon before an audience of none. They danced the story of all things, from the first flame to the last word. As the last player fell, the laughing god vanished, smiling into non-existence. And across the void, a single human child dreamed. She was nameless. She was alone. She held a doll shaped like a Primaris Marine and whispered stories into the darkness. Around her, galaxies pulsed. The nullborn came for her, and stopped, because in her dream the Emperor still walked. The Imperium still fought, and the stars still sang. This dream, this simple act of remembrance was the final defense. The nullborn could not erase what was still being written. And so, as silence loomed, the galaxy held its breath. Not with fear, but with defiance. The Warhammer universe, forged in fire and blood, remembered itself. And in that memory became real again. The end had not come, because someone still cared enough to tell the story. In the aftermath of memory reclaimed, stars rekindled. The Nullborn, halted at the precipice of final erasure, began to dissolve, not defeated by force, but by the unyielding will of sentience to endure. The Spiral Covenant, half eclipsed in unbeing, shuddered as light flowed backward into form. Systems long thought extinguished flickered back into being with the hesitant breath of half-remembered dreams. The Imperium, shattered and fractious, began to cohere. Not all at once. Not with banners and parades, but with whispers, with choices. A guardsman choosing to hold the line despite orders to retreat. A tech priest refusing to upload a corruption-laced archive. A lone inquisitor turning from exterminatus toward investigation. Small, quiet resistances against the collapse of meaning. The emperor did not rise from the golden throne. He did not need to. He was now within the pulse of Terra's crust, in the pause between prayers, in the decision to hope. He no longer commanded with voice or lightning. He inspired by presence alone. And so, those attuned to such things acted not because they were told, but because it was right. Robert Guilliman, once the last loyal son, was no longer alone. From the far reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus, Lion L. Johnson returned. Scarred, wearied, but awakened. He bore no legion, only his sword, his silence, and a truth learned in the deepest fold of the warp, that loyalty must be chosen anew every day. They met not as commander and subordinate, but as brothers reborn. Together, they traveled to the ruins of Cadia, where a statue of Saint Celestine still stood unbroken among the rubble. Here, Guilliman and the Lion began the Concordat Invicta, a pact not of empire, but of guardianship. Not to rule the stars, but to shepherd them. The Mechanicus fragmented. Some clung to ancient scripture. Others, inspired by the Omnibastion's echo, embraced innovation born of faith and reason combined. Archmagos Dacrius of Ryza activated the Thought Forge, an artificial mind crafted not in imitation of man, but in reverence to the machine god's unknowable essence. It did not speak, but it dreamed. And those dreams offered new designs, constructs that stabilized warp breaches, communicators that transmitted through memory, ships guided by shared purpose rather than navigators. A renaissance not of science, but of belief made manifest in machinery. The Eldar, scattered as ever, responded with wary hope. Some among the craft worlds reached toward humanity again, remembering ancient alliances forged against the Necronter. Ivrain, the prophet of Iniad, walked among mortals bearing a single phrase: "Not all futures end in fire." The Necrons, witnessing the failure of absolute silence, recalibrated. The Silent King disappeared from known space, leaving behind a single message encoded within starlight. To speak is to risk, but we must speak. Even among the Tyranids, change festered. Hive fleets splintered in strange new ways, not from weakness, but evolution. Pattern emerged not of consumption, but of curiosity. One such splinter, named Chrysalis by the Imperium, landed on a dead moon and did not feed. It observed, it built, and it waited. The warp remained twisted, but no longer dominant. The gods of chaos did not perish, but they weakened. Their hold over their legions frayed. Mortarion, unmoored, wandered through plague-racked systems seeking a cure to his own curse. Magnus wept tears of clarity, lost between knowledge and guilt. Ongron, maddened to the end, was finally bound by his own world eaters, sealed not out of rebellion, but pity. And Lorger remained silent, watching, writing. And somewhere, in the forgotten cradles of man's birth, children looked to the sky and saw it not as a battleground, but as possibility. Stories passed between hands, not about heroes who slew billions, but those who saved one. In the twilight of the 42nd millennium, a new era dawned. One not free from war, but one where war was no longer the only truth, where remembrance held power, where meaning was defended like a fortress, and where the question was no longer, who will survive the darkness, but rather, what light will we carry into it? The galaxy spun forward. In the void where annihilation once loomed, a current of renewal began its slow sweep across the stars. It did not erase the pain, nor mend every fracture, but it threaded through the darkness like gold through old wounds, proof that something endured. On Terra, among the vaults beneath the former halls of the Astronomicon, a signal ignited, not a beacon of light, but of sound, a choir of thousands, their minds linked by psychoacoustic resonance, singing a harmony older than language, the choir of the last dusk. Their voices, amplified through long-forgotten mechanisms, called out into the warp not as a demand, but an invitation. Some warp echoes responded. Not all were demons. In the strange folds between real space and unreality, forgotten intelligences stirred. Not chaos-born, but warp-native, the unspoken, entities of reflection and metaphor. They had once whispered to ancient seers before the fall of the Eldar. Now, lured by the notes of shared meaning, they drifted closer, curious. The Inquisition fractured. Some clung to dogma, to fire and fear. Others, led by Inquisitor Meraxi of Ordo Chronos, formed the Lex Ordo, a coalition committed not to rooting out heresy, but to safeguarding the memory of mankind. They created sanctuaries, memory vaults, storytelling citadels called spires of truth. Within them, scribes, psychers, artists, and soldiers gathered to preserve what was true, not perfect, not clean, but real. In Segmentum Pacificus, the fleet once lost to the Cicatrix Maledictum returned, but not as it left. Commanded now by Admiral Primus Hest, its vessels bore strange designs, part imperial, part Xenos, part unknown. They called themselves the Concord of Shards. Hest claimed they had passed through a region beyond known space where time looped into itself. They survived by adapting not just technology but thought. Their creed was one of synthesis, that survival demanded integration, not domination. Some in the High Lords called them heretics. Others called them necessary. Among the Adepta Sororitas, miracles multiplied. Not all were grand. One sister stood beside a broken reactor core and prayed until it cooled. Another reached out to a corrupted PDF regiment and convinced them to lay down arms. The living saints multiplied, not canonized by the ecclesiarchy, but recognized by their actions. They were not all human. One, the Saint of Glass, was a former Eldar Corsair. Another, Saint Pattern Ela, was a combat servitor who began speaking in scripture never written. The orcs, ever the agents of entropy, remained unchanged. But even in their mindless drive, echoes of the galaxy's new rhythm stirred. A whack broke apart mid-battle, its warboss distracted by a child's drawing of a peaceful world. Confused, he wandered off, mumbling about, what if there's more to Crumpin than just Crumpin? The Tau expanded again, but now they did so with hesitation. The Enclaves, led by Commander Brightspear, pushed for contact rather than conquest. They initiated the Treaty of Spheres, an agreement of cultural exchange between themselves and fringe imperial systems. It was fragile. It was not always honored, but it existed. The galaxy had never known such a moment. Not peace, but pause. In that pause, choices flourished. On a dead world orbiting a blue-white star, a single tree grew where none should. Around it gathered warriors and scholars, rogues and zealots, who felt drawn not by power, but by the question carved into its bark. What do you wish to leave behind? Their new orders were founded. The Knights Penitent, who swore to never wield power without reflection. The Order of the Spiral Flame, who studied warp echoes not to command, but to understand. The Forgiven Sons, Astartes who had fallen to chaos and returned, marked not by purity, but by resolve. And in the void, at the edge of the segmentum tempestus, the stars trembled. Something woke. Not a god, not a race, not an empire. Place. A system lost even to myth. Ullanor, where the emperor once led the greatest triumph against the orcs. Where Horus first saw the depth of mankind's might. And where now time shivered. Ships that entered Ullanor did not emerge destroyed. They returned changed. One bore its own echo, trailing 30 seconds behind itself in visible space. Another had crew who had aged backward to infancy. A third sent no transmissions, but every night at midnight, a whisper rang across the noosphere. We are not yet done. The galaxy vast beyond knowing stirred, not with the rage of old, but with wonder. Because in the 43rd millennium, a new war was beginning not for dominance, but for definition. The war for what the galaxy would become. And in this war, every voice mattered. Even yours, especially yours. In the shadowed periphery of Ullanor's awakening, ancient vaults unsealed themselves. Structures older than the Imperium stirred, revealing mechanisms etched with languages no race claimed as their own. Some were crystalline arrays that sang to light. Others pulsed with gravitational whispers, drawing the attention of all who wandered too close. Explorator fleets dispatched by the Adeptus Mechanicus approached with reverence and dread, finding not traps or weapons but invitations. One such vault, dubbed the Locus Aeternum, broadcast a repeating sigil into the minds of nearby psychers. A spiral inside a sun, wrapped in 13 wings. The meaning was unclear, but every time it pulsed, the warp around it calmed. And from within the vault came a voice. We watched, we grieved, now we will remember. This was not technology. It was memory incarnate, repositories of thought, emotion, and meaning from a civilization long extinguished. What they sought was not conquest, but connection. For every race had danced with extinction, and these vaults asked only one question. What did you learn? On Mars, debate fractured the Fabricator General's conclave. Some demanded the vaults be dismantled, sanctified, and reassembled under the Omnissia's directive. Others, inspired by the new harmony blooming across sectors, proposed dialogue instead. Archmagos Lexim of the latter forge initiated Project Soulframe, an effort to translate vault song into liturgical data psalms, forming a bridge between machine and meaning. The Adeptus Astartes changed, too. No longer a unified crusade, the chapters redefined their purpose. The Ultramarines focused on mentorship, creating satellite academies for training mortal commanders. The Space Wolves withdrew into Fenris, taking a vow to protect, not invade. The Salamanders opened their forge temples to civilian refugees, crafting tools and prosthetics for those long ignored. And in the galactic north, the Exorcists created the Circle of Red, a round table of warriors and philosophers where all Astartes, even fallen ones seeking redemption, could speak freely. They debated the meaning of loyalty, of strength, of guilt. It was not peace, but it was healing. On Kamarak, a schism split the Drukhari. The cult of shattered bliss, founded by the witch Lilith's former disciple Kaevra, turned away from suffering as sustenance. Instead, they explored a forgotten art, the conversion of pain into joy, ecstasy not through torment, but through shared experience. They were hunted. Many died, but their rituals spread in secret, whispering through cabals and homunculi courts like forbidden fire. The Harlequins watched in silence. Their mask of the hidden veil performed a new dance upon the surface of a moon fractured by temporal storms. Each step shimmered with implication. When it ended, they left behind no words, only a mirror. Within it was not a reflection, but 1,000 futures, all different, all real. The Imperium Nihilus, once forsaken in the wake of the cicatrix maledictum, began to thrive in its own way. Disconnected from Terra, it had no choice but to adapt. Planetary alliances formed, exchanging resources, protection, and culture. New saints rose not by decree, but by story. The Red Prophet of Dusk, who quelled 3 demon incursions with only his voice. The Grey Lantern, who wandered from world to world healing rifts in the veil with laughter. And then came the Dreaming War. It began with visions. Every psyker across the galaxy, every dreamer, every madman saw the same place. A garden without boundaries, filled with endless stars. In its center, a gate made of hope and regret. A voice called from beyond it. Choose what you will become. Soon after, the fractures began. Reality shimmered. People walked between moments, found echoes of themselves, saw possible lives they never lived. It was not chaos, it was potential made real. And from this arose the Solari Compact, a coalition of humans, Eldar, Tau, even Necrons, who swore to protect the dreamscape from exploitation. For not all who entered the dreaming had noble intent. Cults formed, devoted to tearing down the barrier between real and unreal. Chaos gods watched with envy, sensing something beyond even their reach. And the word bearers, long dormant, resurfaced with a new gospel. We wrote the galaxy once. We will write it again. They were met not with armies, but with storytellers. On the walls of fortress monasteries, tales were painted. In the depths of void ships, songs were sung that bent the warp. In the spires of hive cities, children played games that anchored reality. And for a moment, brief, fragile, true, the galaxy remembered itself. Not as a graveyard, not as a battlefield, but as a place where meaning could live. And as the 43rd millennium unfolded, its chronicle no longer written solely in blood and fire, but in dreams, in dialogue, and in defiance of despair. The stars watched back, and they hoped. In the cooling embers of the dreaming war, new tensions whispered through the stars. Though the galaxy had touched something close to unity, it was not immune to fear. The Ordo Chronos, long thought dissolved, emerged once more. From the shattered remnants of time-warped vaults and forsaken inquisitorial archives, agents returned, bearing strange relics and memories that clashed with reality. They had seen futures both glorious and ruined, and they believed that the dreaming gate, the astral threshold glimpsed by so many, was not just an opportunity. It was a test. On Terra, the High Lords convened in deeper secrecy than ever before. Debate burned within the Council of the Throne. Should the Imperium steer its fate toward this dream-born evolution, or double down on tradition and structure? Some advocated expansion of the Solari Compact's ideals. Others demanded immediate containment. The Adeptus Custodes stood in silent judgment. Valerian, now Commander General of their ranks, offered no counsel, only a single decree: guard the soul of mankind, even from itself. In the eastern fringes, the Tau found themselves changed. Exposure to the dreamscape had introduced something unforeseen: belief. For a people long defined by logic, strategy, and unity, faith had been an afterthought. But now, whispers of the Starseer movement grew. These were ethereal and fire-cast warriors alike who claimed to have spoken with the echo beyond, the collective subconscious memory of every being that had ever lived. They preached a revised greater good, one that welcomed the irrational as essential. Many saw this as heresy. Others called it evolution. The Necrons responded differently. To them, the dream was a curse, a reminder of what they had once been. Some dynasties recoiled, retreating into hibernation protocols, refusing to acknowledge their pain. But others, most notably the Sotek under a newly reborn Imhotep, embraced it. Imhotep the Reclaimer declared that the war in heaven had not ended, that the Tan, long shattered, still echoed through the warp in fractured thought. He aimed not to destroy them again, but to bind their essence into new crystalline forms, giving rise to the anima constructs, silent avatars of memory and regret. From deep within the Eye of Terror, the Chaos Gods watched. The dreaming was not theirs, yet it affected their domains. Sench in particular seethed, for potential had become actual. Where once he manipulated futures, now mortals shaped them. Slaanesh hungered for the concentrated emotion birthed by such dreams. Nurgle was quiet, contemplative. Only Khorne raged with clarity. But the greatest change came from without. At the edge of Segmentum Pacificus, a signal long thought lost returned. It was not Imperial. It was not Xenos. It was human. From a lost Arch Mechanicus named the Eternum Vox, presumed destroyed during the Age of Apostasy. It broadcasted one phrase over and over: "We have touched the origin." When finally reached by a recon fleet of the Rogue Traders Guild, the ship was found perfectly preserved, orbiting a star that did not appear on any map. Its crew had not aged. Its databanks were filled with music, stories, and languages that predated recorded history. And in its heart, a chamber bathed in golden light. Within, a child, floating, sleeping. Psychers who gazed upon it wept. Warriors dropped their weapons. The Mechanicus recorded a new energy field, one that bent probability without warp interference. The Ecclesiarchy named it the Starborn Saint. The Solari Compact named it the First Dreamer. Debate turned to conflict. Was the child a god, a weapon, a reincarnation of the Emperor's dream? No one agreed. But all agreed on one thing: something was coming. In the silence of the void, the stars began to hum again. Not as a warning, not as a hymn, but as a question. And across the galaxy, from Shrine World to Tomb World, from Hive City to Craft World, from the Black Library to the frozen wastes of Cadia's remains, the answer began to take shape. It was not written. It was not spoken. It was lived. In defiance, in compassion, in remembrance. And the next age would not be forged by war alone, but by the stories they chose to believe in, and those they dared to become. As the galaxy stirred beneath the gentle pulse of the Starborn Saint, ancient powers and new hopes wove a fragile tapestry across the stars. The Imperium, still reeling from centuries of war and stagnation, found itself at a crossroads unlike any before. The Adeptus Mechanicus, under Archmagos Lexim's renewed vision, accelerated Project Soulframe, integrating the Memory Vault's knowledge with their sacred machine spirit doctrines. This fusion birthed a new philosophy, the harmony of thought and spirit, promising enlightenment through synthesis rather than subjugation. Meanwhile, the Solari Compact expanded its reach, becoming a beacon for diverse races seeking refuge and understanding beyond endless conflict. Humans, Eldar, Tau, and even cautious Necrons participated in forums where dreams and memories were shared openly, fostering tentative trust. Yet shadows lingered. The Chaos Gods, deprived of their usual grip on mortal destiny, conspired in the depths. Sench's schemes grew labyrinthine, seeking loopholes in the dreamscape's fabric. Slaanesh's followers danced with reckless abandon, harvesting the new energies of emotion and potential. Among the Astartes, change rippled quietly but steadily. Chapters like the Ultramarines adapted, blending martial discipline with philosophical inquiry. The Raven Guard deepened their mastery of stealth and knowledge, becoming guardians not just of territory but of secrets and dreams. Even the Dark Angels, long shrouded in mystery, revealed fragments of forgotten truth, tales of a past where their Primarch Lionel Johnson had glimpsed the dreaming gate itself. The Eldar craftworlds, having faced extinction before, embraced this new era with cautious hope. The Harlequins' dances told stories that transcended time, while the Inari preached resurrection through memory and unity. But the galaxy remained on edge. The word spread. The dreaming war had merely shifted its battlefield. In the void, a fleet of unknown origin emerged, a coalition of lost civilizations united by a vision of cosmic harmony. They called themselves the Celestial Chorus, singing songs that resonated with the Starborn Saints' energy. Their arrival sparked wonder and fear in equal measure. The Imperium saw allies and potential usurpers. The Tau debated diplomacy and defense. The Eldar pondered fate. The Necrons calculated risks. And the Chaos Gods seethed, sensing their hold weakening. At the heart of these converging forces stood the child, the first dreamer, still floating in suspended slumber, a symbol of hope, mystery, and destiny. Stories blossomed around the dreamer, legends spun in every language and faith. Some saw salvation, others doom, yet none could ignore the pull. For the next chapter of the galaxy's saga was unfolding, not through conquest or destruction, but through the power of dreams and the courage to believe. And as the stars hummed their eternal song, every soul, from the humblest servant to the greatest warrior, was called to listen and choose their path. Because the story was no longer just about survival. It was about becoming. In the vast shadows of the Segmentum Solar, where the Astronomicon burned brightest and the echoes of old Earth still whispered across the void, the Imperium of Man writhed in. A state of constant siege. The forces of chaos were not idle, and neither were the myriad Xenos races that clawed at humanity's borders. Yet within the heart of the Imperium, in the cathedrals of Mars and the black spires of Terra, ancient plans churned and secret wars unfolded with every passing cycle. It was in this age, not of peace but grim resolve, that Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and Lord Commander of the Imperium, walked once more among the stars. Awoken from stasis by call and blessed by Saint Celestine herself, Guilliman was the last hope of a fractured empire. He moved with divine purpose, wielding the Emperor's will like a blade, seeking to restore order to the madness of the 41st millennium. His indomitous crusade, vast and holy, was a spear of light thrust into the encroaching dark, bearing new warriors, the Primaris Space Marines. Crafted in secret over 10 millennia, these superhuman warriors were humanity's answer to extinction. But not all welcomed the rebirth. The High Lords of Terra whispered among themselves, unsure whether Guilliman was a savior or a threat to their power. The Adeptus Mechanicus, bound by ancient treaties, sought to ensure their dominion over technology was not challenged by the Primarch's reforms. And in the shadowy depths of the Imperium Nihilus, that vast stretch of space cut off by the cicatrix maledictum, the cries of entire worlds went unheard, their fates sealed in silence and blood. Among these forsaken worlds stood Vigilus, a jewel now dulled by war. There, the Black Legion descended, Abaddon the Despoiler at their head. The War Master of Chaos, twisted and eternal, led the 13th Black Crusade not merely to conquer but to unmake. His goal was not the destruction of Vigilus alone, but to drive a wedge into the Imperium's veins, to bleed it from within. On Vigilus, war did not rage. It screamed. Cults writhed in the underhives, Genestealer broods festered in the dark, and orc warbands roared across the wastes, drawn to the carnage like flies to rot. As Guilliman attempted to restore unity, chaos sowed division. The Thousand Sons, led by Magnus the Red, struck at the heart of knowledge, targeting the Black Library and arcane sanctuaries across the galaxy. The Death Guard, led by Mortar Ion, unleashed plagues not just of flesh, but of despair and entropy. Even the Eldar, fractured yet prescient, acted through the Inari to awaken long-dead gods and reshape the fate of the stars. And always, beneath it all, the Tyranids approached. Silent, hungry, the hive fleets evolved with every engagement, learning, adapting. Kraken, Leviathan, Behemoth, now new tendrils curled through the void, drawn by the immense energies released by the cicatrix. Some whispered of a new hive mind, deeper and more malevolent than before. Others feared the Tyranids were but the harbinger of something even worse, a darkness from beyond the known galaxy. Meanwhile, the Necrons stirred, no longer mindless automatons, their dynasties reawakened with purpose. The Silent King returned, bearing knowledge of the warp that should not be possible for creatures of metal and logic. He did not seek simple conquest, but a galactic order, one without chaos, without gods. His motives were veiled, his actions precise. On worlds once thought barren, tomb complexes opened, and reality itself bent under the weight of ancient technology. In this crucible of endless war, the Adeptus Sororitas marched with hymns of fire. The Inquisition hunted truths too dangerous to name, and rogue traders plied void lanes choked with demons and dreams. The Imperium endured, not through strength alone, but because it could not afford to fall. Yet across the Imperium, Psychers dreamed, and in those dreams, a golden light wept. The Emperor, bound to his golden throne, stirred in ways not seen for 10,000 years. Some said he whispered through his chosen, others that his divine essence cracked beneath the burden of a dying humanity. And beyond it all, a final prophecy loomed of the end times, of a reckoning not born of chaos alone, but of every sin the Imperium had buried and every lie it had lived. A reckoning that would begin not in fire, but in silence, on a world forgotten by name, beneath stars that no longer shone. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And the war was far from over. Beneath the lightless reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, where the cicatrix maledictum tore reality asunder and navigation by the Astronomicon faltered, the Imperium Nihilus languished in isolation. These were realms abandoned by fate and condemned by the warp, where entire subsectors collapsed into anarchy or worse. Yet even here, amid hopelessness and horror, sparks of resistance burned. One such spark ignited upon the void-scarred world of Malakbil, where remnants of the Blood Angels chapter fought an unending war against demonic incursions and traitor legions. Led by the stern and indomitable Commander Dante, the ancient Lord of the Angels resisted despair, clinging to the memory of Sanguinius and the legacy of sacrifice. Despite being centuries old, Dante remained vigilant, driven by prophecy and bound by duty. Some whispered that he had spoken with Guilliman himself in visions, and that his role in the final battle yet to come would be pivotal. Elsewhere, the Grey Knights pursued a path known only to them, waging psychic war against the archenemy across dimensions unseen. Guided by Supreme Grand Master Kaldor Drago, they walked through the warp itself, slaying greater demons and unraveling blasphemous rituals. Drago, cursed to wander the Immaterium, carved wards into Daemonhide with his flaming blade, his every step echoing defiance against fate. Though the Imperium barely knew of their deeds, it was said that entire worlds were saved by their unseen hands. But not all resistance was divine. On the Forge world of Graia, overrun by techno-heretics and corrupted data spirits, a group of Skitarii and loyalist tech priests enacted a desperate gambit. They reawakened an ancient Ordinatus platform, a weapon from the age of strife long thought inert. With it, they shattered the Heretics' dominion in a single cataclysmic salvo, but at great cost. Mars, ever jealous of unsanctioned innovation, responded not with praise, but with silence and veiled threats. Meanwhile, on the eastern edge of the Imperium, the Tau Empire expanded like a patient tide. Though fractured by internal schisms and reeling from losses to Hive Fleet Gorgon and the encroachments of chaos, the Tau continued to preach the greater good. Ethereal leaders, cloaked in mystery, manipulated both friend and foe alike with disarming sincerity. Yet whispers circulated of something else. A new caste, hidden and strange, and of experiments with warp-tainted energies their science could not comprehend. In the depths of Kamarak, the dark city writhed with delight. The Drukhari reveled in the torment of 1,000,000 captives, feeding their endless hunger for sensation. Yet not all of them were content with the old ways. Archons and homunculi formed pacts with strange allies, even reaching into the realm of the Inari, who sought to unify the Eldari under the reborn god Ennead. This fragile alliance shimmered on the edge of betrayal, but it offered a sliver of hope against the death spiral of their ancient race. Among the shattered craft worlds, hope and doom danced together. Bealtan, once shattered, now pulsed with new life under Ivrain's guidance. She, the prophet of Ennead, walked the path between death and rebirth, bringing together Exodites, Corsairs, and surviving aspect warriors in a mission to awaken a god that might one day destroy Slaanesh. Each victory came at a cost, but the Eldari had long known the price of survival. Back on Terra, strange occurrences gathered like storm clouds around the Imperial Palace. Pilgrims reported visions of a radiant figure walking among the colonnades. Psychers collapsed in fits of ecstasy or terror. Some in the Adeptus Custodes spoke of the throne flickering, of mechanisms ancient and divine shifting ever so slightly. And from the vaults beneath the palace, the Sisters of Silence marched in silence, answering a summons they did not question. And through all of this, a new force began to rise. The Arcs of Omen, launched by Abaddon and guided by the mysterious Vashtor the Arcaphane, scoured the galaxy in search of ancient devices, keys to something known only as the weapon. These arcs, vast demon engines and tomb fortresses, carved bloody paths through reality, seeking fragments hidden across 10,000 years of forgotten war. Vashtor, a creature neither demon nor machine, sought to remake the fabric of the galaxy in his image. Abaddon, long underestimated by the High Lords of Terra, was no longer simply a warlord. He was architect, prophet, destroyer. His alliance with Vashtor threatened to transcend the petty wars of men and reach into the structure of reality itself. In him, the Chaos Gods had found more than a servant. They had found a harbinger. And across the galaxy, the Black Templars, zealous and unbroken, launched new crusades into the dark. They bore relics and hatred in equal measure, vowing to purge the unclean until no heretic or Xenos remained. The flames of faith burned bright in their wake, even as the galaxy sank deeper into shadow. For even in the darkest reaches of the void, where hope dared not tread, war never ceased. It evolved, it remembered, and it waited, far beyond the reach of any star charts known to the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, in regions where void storms howl with the laughter of dark gods. A forgotten planet stirred beneath the shroud of an artificial eclipse. It had no name in Imperial records, no designation in Mechanicus databanks. But to those who served the ruinous powers, it was known as Ethris Maw, a crucible world steeped in warp energy, hidden for millennia, and now reawakened by forces beyond mortal comprehension. It was here that Vashtor the Arcaphane had established one of his most profane forges. Great engines of tortured steel rose from the flesh of the world, tethered to the sky with pylons that bled lightning. Vast reservoirs of demon oil churned in hollowed valleys, each drop containing souls twisted into fuel. Servitor slaves of half metal, half shadow labored, without end, assembling mechanisms not meant for this galaxy. And at the center, within a sanctum of whispering circuitry, Vashtor brooded over the next phase of his grand design. The weapon, as he named it, was not a singular thing but a confluence, a fusion of arcane machinery, cursed relics, and warp-born intelligences. Its parts were scattered across time and space, hidden in the vaults of long-dead civilizations, buried beneath demon worlds, and guarded by relic keepers who had forgotten what they protected. Each arc of omens sent forth by Abaddon bore coordinates to one such location, guided by Vashtor's unknowable vision. He spoke of reshaping reality, not merely for chaos, but for a new age where machine and demon would be indistinguishable, a kingdom of logic and madness entwined. The arcs spread like tumors. One shattered the agri-world of Saranthos, releasing warp plagues that turned crops into sentient, screaming biomass. Another desecrated the shrine world of Lamentus 9, unleashing a tidal wave of temporal stasis that froze pilgrims mid-prayer, statuesque and weeping blood. Resistance came, of course, from the Adeptus Astartes, from the Astra Militarum, from Sisters of Battle burning heresy with holy fire. But for each arc stopped, two more breached the veil. Meanwhile, the rift in the galaxy, the Great Rift, did more than divide space. It divided time, fate, and the very soul of the Imperium. On one side, the light of the Astronomicon still pierced the dark. On the other, Imperium Nihilus had become a different kind of empire, one ruled not by edict but by survival. On Hiveworld Calvarax, Lord Commissar Albrecht turned cannibal gangs into a functioning militia, binding thousands to the Emperor through sheer fear and will. On the Space Hulk Iron Mandible, repurposed into a wandering fortress, remnants of the Astra Militarum, Sisters, and even rogue Mechanicus elements forged a pact, creating a micro-ecclesiarchy that burned heresy with plasma and scripture alike. In this fractured Imperium, new legends were born. Lord Solar Leontis, commander of the newly formed Cadian shock troopers, led daring campaigns that defied logistical impossibility, carving corridors of light through the rift. His command was both art and science, mixing ancient strategies with gut instinct. Under his leadership, the shattered remnants of Cadia found new purpose. Their armor bore the memory of a dead world. Their wrath echoed with vengeance. But no victory came unopposed. The word-bearers, ever fanatical, launched their own crusade, not of steel, but of corruption. They seeded entire populations with cursed faith, turning imperial shrines into vectors of chaos worship. On the world of Velgath Prime, Cardinal Draxus, once revered across 12 systems, was revealed to be a vessel of a lesser demon. His sermons, broadcast on Vox relays for years, had subtly reshaped the beliefs of millions. The Inquisition purged Velgath in a storm of orbital fire, but the infection had already spread. The Inquisition itself was at a crossroads. Ordos clashed behind closed doors. Some among the Ordo Hereticus believed Guilliman's reforms bordered on treason. Others in the Ordo Xenos pushed for cooperation with alien races like the Eldar and the Tau against common threats, citing ancient prophecies recovered from long-lost watch fortresses. And the Ordo Malleus faced their eternal paradox. To study the warp was to risk corruption, but to ignore it was to ensure doom. On the fractured moon of Serix Magna, an inquisitor known only as Syphax uncovered an artifact not seen since the Horus Heresy, a shard of the Athame used in the betrayal at Istvan. The weapon pulsed with psychic memory, screaming with the echoes of loyalist blood. Its discovery sparked a secret war between rival inquisitors, each convinced the blade held the key to ending chaos or accelerating the final damnation of mankind. And still, the whispers grew. Across battlefields, seers of all races began to speak of a coming convergence. The Tyranid hive fleets, thought to be distant and fractured, began to shift course. Tendrils once feeding on void realms now moved with purpose toward the galactic core. A new force was at work behind them, a synaptic presence not born of the hive mind as known before, but something deeper, more ancient. Some among the Eldar whispered a name, Nkarigash, the world eater beneath the veil, a thing that even Slaanesh once feared. As storm clouds gathered in all quadrants of the galaxy, a final vision was seen by a psyker on the black ship Tranquility. Before her mind burned out, she painted a mural in her own blood across the bulkhead walls. A starless sky, a broken Aquila, and a single figure standing in flame and shadow. No name was spoken, but the message was clear. The end was not coming. It had already begun. On the blood-racked plains of Vigilus, where war had become the natural rhythm of the soil and the screams of the dying echoed louder than thunder, the fire of resistance and ruin still raged. The once vital gateway to the Nachmund Gauntlet had become a cauldron of unending conflict. Though Robot Gilliman himself had intervened years prior, the wounds of that war festered anew. Cultist enclaves, seeded during the War of Nightmares, had grown into full-blown demon-worshipping fiefdoms. Warbands of the Black Legion poured from hidden webway gates corrupted by Vashtor's arcanotech, setting cities ablaze with balefire. But the Imperium was not idle. The newly appointed Castellan militant Marshal Vortendrell imposed a brutal doctrine of exaction and cleansing, deploying waves of Khazarkan, Ogrins, and Stormtrooper brigades in a ruthless counter-crusade. Above the chaos, the skies of Vigilus darkened with the descent of a new terror. The Genestealer cults, long buried in the substrata of the hive sprawls, rose in coordinated rebellion. But these were no longer merely insurrectionists. A new broodlord, swollen with unnatural biomass and psychic resonance, guided them. It bore traits of both Tyranid and unknown xenoform, and when it screamed, Vox circuits across the system shattered. It was no mere prophet, it was a herald. And the herald spoke of the coming of the worm. From the dark between stars, where warp and real space entwined in viscous tides, a shadow moved, larger than any hive fleet known, older than the behemoth, kraken, or leviathan. Designated only as Hive Fleet Ouroboros by terrified Magi Biologists, this colossal entity approached not with hunger alone, but with a mind tuned to ancient frequencies. It bypassed systems deemed ideal for consumption, targeting instead worlds heavy with blackstone deposits, psi-reactive minerals, or residual traces of old night technology. The Mechanicus panicked. Explorator fleets, once proud and aloof, now begged for Imperial Navy escort. For in the dark, the things they had long theorized about, self-guided synaptic cores, partially warp-phase bioforms, and even evidence of Tyranid-captured Necron code, were no longer conjecture. And at the heart of this strange fleet pulsed a singular beacon, a monstrous synaptic relay in the shape of a dead star, caged within a chitinous chrysalis. Its signals twisted the dreams of even the black ship's most cloistered psychers. Some fell into comas. Others awoke screaming names never spoken by human tongues. On Luna, within the sanctum of the Silent Order, the matriarchs of the Sisters of Silence convened. Their voices silent, their minds shielded, they had sensed the beacon long before the Mechanicus had named it. One among them, known only as Sibylla Orth, broke 1,000 years of personal vow and spoke a single sentence to her assembled kin. The veil is thinning. The message was relayed directly to Gilliman himself. And for the first time since his resurrection, the Primarch of the Ultramarines paused in silence for a full hour. When he spoke again, his orders rippled across Segmentum Solar. Initiate Protocol Indomitus Secundus. This was not merely a reinforcement. It was a summoning of forgotten legions. Shield companies of the Adeptus Custodes redeployed from the Imperial Palace. The Sisters of Silence moved en masse, their black ships vanishing into the void. Deep within the Schola Progenium, savants activated ancient cogitators, awakening Astartes stockpiles that had not been opened since the Scouring. Unnumbered sons of Dorn, Coryx, Vulcan, and Rus rose again in fresh ceramite. The call reached even the most remote corners. On the feral world of Hraxos, a forgotten watch fortress of the Death Watch reactivated, its kill teams returning to service under the cry of a galaxy at the brink. Even the elusive Raven Guard, long operating in shadows and silence, emerged to deliver intelligence gathered over centuries. A warning that Ouroboros was not the end. It was the beginning. And still, as the Tyrannid swarm darkened systems and the stars themselves seemed to dim, a flicker of gold rose through the dark. On a dead shrine world near the Ghoul stars, a miracle occurred. A statue of Saint Sabbat, shattered for centuries, reformed in full view of 1,000,000 pilgrims. The blind wept blood and saw again. Vox signals once corrupted broadcast only one phrase: "The Emperor protects." Across the galaxy, armies of men, machines, Xenos and demons prepared their final weapons, recited their final oaths, and sharpened their final blades. The last age of the galaxy was not coming. It had begun, and the galaxy burned ever brighter beneath the shadow of its doom. Beyond the light of the Astronomicon, in the region of space known as the Charnel Deeps, where stellar corpses outnumbered the living suns, a force long thought extinct stirred in silent fury. The Necrons of the Nihilak dynasty, once dormant beneath 2 moons scattered across the void, began to awaken in mass synchronization. It was not coincidence. Something deep within the data crystals of their ancient command nexuses had been triggered, a resonance patterned after the psychic echoes of Hive Fleet Ouroboros. Nemzir Zondrek, strange among his kind for the flickering memories of his ancient organic past, was the first to interpret the signals not as a threat, but as a call. His armies mobilized not to conquer, but to investigate. Accompanied by his tireless bodyguard, Vargard Oberon, Zondrek traced the signal to a shattered moon known in ancient glyphs as Exentoric, a grave world lost since the war in heaven. What they found was impossible. Tyrannid bioforms moving in patterns eerily similar to Canoptech units, guided by a synaptic will that mimicked Necron command protocols. Elsewhere, Trazyn the Infinite, ever curious and ever conniving, delved deep into his galleries beneath Salamis, unlocking forbidden archives long sealed. In a stasis vault labeled simply The Divide, he found records of pre-Old Night bioengineering experiments that suggested a horrifying truth. Hive Fleet Ouroboros was not alien to the galaxy. It was born from it, created by an ancient Xenos race to combat the warp, imprisoned in protomatter for eons, and now loosed upon the stars. Trazyn dispatched emissaries not only to other Necron dynasties, but to unlikely allies. In the Segmentum Pacificus, a clandestine parley took place between the ancient Necron overlord and an envoy of the craftworld Ulthwi. Led by Farser Kairis, the Eldar brought grim news from their own auguries. The threads of fate had begun to fray, not as strands cut by chance or war, but as if being unwoven deliberately by a force outside the tapestry. "This is not merely the end of the cycle," Kairis told him, standing before an immobile tan shard imprisoned in crystal. "This is the end of causality itself." Meanwhile, the orcs were not idle. Drawn by the sheer scale of violence erupting across the stars Wyack, Grimburna erupted from the Gortusk Nebula. Led by a particularly massive warboss known only as Skullcrumpa, whose cybernetic jaw housed a stolen Necron targeting array, the Horde smashed its way towards Segmentum Obscurus. Their goal was unclear, save that Skullcrumpa had claimed in a grot-filmed speech that he saw a bug so big it ate moons, and now he wanted to punch it in the gob. Chaos, too, moved in strength, not to ally but to consume. Abaddon the Despoiler, wielding the gifts of Vashtor and empowered by ancient demon boons, launched a new offensive toward the Maelstrom. But within the Eye of Terror, cracks formed. Realms once thought stable began to unravel. The gods of chaos, long fractious but bound by shared purpose, now warred openly with one another. Khorne's bloodthirsters turned on. Scientian sorcerers in the depths of pandemonium. Nurgle's plagues lost potency, devoured by Slaaneshi entities of hunger rather than excess. The great game was shifting, its board burning, its rules forgotten. And in the silence between the screams, a new presence watched. The Inari, followers of Iniad, saw visions of rebirth twisted into omens of annihilation. Ivrain, the emissary, walked the shattered webways between Craftworlds and Kamarak, her path dogged by assassins and prophets alike. She spoke of a coming convergence that would end not death, but all becoming. In a moment of desperation, she sought an audience with Gilliman. He received her aboard the Makridge's honor in orbit above Nemengast. "We must unite," she said, "or vanish into the mouth of the worm." Gilliman, ever pragmatic, did not answer her with words but with silence. And then, with orders, the Indomitus Crusade entered its final phase. Every chapter, every Forge world, every remaining naval group was given a single directive: hold, survive, endure. But even as those words echoed across Vox relays, the stars themselves began to die. Entire systems winked out not from war but from collapse. Gravimetric disturbances unlike any recorded swept through regions of space, turning gas giants into brown dwarfs, igniting dead moons, and swallowing entire fleets into localized folds of unreality. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it the Null Bloom. The Eldar called it the Hunger Below. But on one cursed world of the old Orphean expanse, scribbled in the blood of a million dead, a name was written: Karigesh. And above it all, in the cold void where even the warp dared not touch, a single voice laughed. Not in madness, but in memory. The war for the soul of the galaxy had entered its final stage. In the eternal dark of the void, as empires crumbled and gods tore at each other's throats, a forgotten signal broke through the veil of silence. A beacon not of imperial origin, nor of Xeno's design, but something older. On the edge of the Segmentum Ultima, near the long-dead halo stars, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica intercepted an anomalous pattern buried in the warp static of a dying sun. When decrypted, it revealed an ancient message, encoded in a dialect of pre-Unity Terran, lost before even the rise of the Emperor. It said only this: "We saw the end. We chained it. It has gnawed through. Run." A conclave of High Lords met in secret beneath the Imperial Palace, their faces pale beneath the sigils of their office. The Emperor's corpse throne flickered with golden light, yet the Astronomicon pulsed irregularly, as if the soul of the master of mankind trembled. From the vaults beneath the palace emerged figures long unseen, null maidens in unbroken phalanx, gray knights whose very names had been erased, and tech priests of the Omega Cipher, bearing cogitators sheathed in sigillite and warded by forgotten saints. The Imperium prepared not for battle, but for apocalypse. Meanwhile, in the webway, a convergence stirred. The Harlequins of the Mask of the Veiled Path gathered in the forgotten chamber of the Laughing God, silent and still. They danced the dance of the final echo, a performance never meant to be seen, its meaning known only to the solitaire. When the last step fell, a single tear of light fell from the Harlequin's mask and shattered on the crystalline floor. It opened a path. At its end stood Segarak, or what remained of him. The Laughing God did not laugh anymore. On the Forge world of Griffin Beta Resurgent, Archmagos Dominus Callax 77 issued a final transmission before the planet fell silent. A single picked feed showed Mechanicus Magi kneeling before a figure of impossible geometry. Metal and flesh folded into itself like a Mobius scream. Behind it stood a swarm of bioforms, their shapes shifting between tyrannid and something else, forms that seemed to phase between probability states. The message was time-stamped 3 days into the future. Time itself had begun to bleed. In the Black Library, sealed against even the gaze of the warp, Eldred Ulthrin meditated within a sphere of unlight. His mind, ancient beyond most reckoning, pierced further than any had dared. What he saw shook even his vaunted soul. "It is not the end," he whispered. "It is the unmaking of the question." The hive mind changed. The collective awareness of the tyrannid swarms shifted tone. No longer only hunger but calculation. Ouroboros did not merely consume, it analyzed, adapted, evolved. It began to shape the warp around it, not in chaotic flare, but in nullifying zones of conceptual silence. Librarians could not scry it. Demons could not manifest within its wake. It was not a predator. It was a conclusion. And then came the fall of Cadavros. A system on the edge of imperial mapping, Cadavros held nothing of value, no forge, no hive, no mineral wealth. But it burned brighter than Sol for a moment, then vanished. When an Astartes strike force of the Fire Lord's chapter arrived, they found something impossible. The system had been inverted. The planets, stars, and even void space appeared as hollow negatives. Time ran backward for minutes at a time. Marines aged and regressed, memory becoming uncertain. And then the voice came, not spoken, but felt, across every living and non-living thing. A presence that declared not purpose, but finality. "I was not born. I was realized. I do not consume. I restore balance. I am the zeroed path." From then on, its name spread across every faction like wildfire whispered through the warp. No longer merely Ouroboros. It was becoming Nadir. Guilliman convened his last war council. Attendees included not only imperial leaders, but a delegation from Kamarak, an emissary of the Tau etheric caste, a Necron cryptek of the Sotek dynasty, and a Inari conclave, all bound by fear of a greater oblivion. None trusted each other, but all knew the truth. The galaxy had one chance, not to win, but to persist. And thus began the final accord. A unity of desperation, a plan to strike at the very heart of Nadir's mind, wherever it truly resided. A great fleet was assembled, pieced together from unwilling allies and ancient enemies. Void craft painted with the heraldry of the long dead. Machines guided by souls. Beasts carried in stasis cages. A single purpose burned in them all. Strike before the last thought of the galaxy was erased. For beyond the edge of time, something waited with open arms. Not death, not silence, but erasure. The last war had begun. The final accord moved through the stars like a phantom fleet, every engine burn cloaked behind null fields, every warp jump woven through thousand-year-old Eldar skein routes, every transmission encoded in hybrid ciphers only known to dead languages. It was a procession of doom, not to herald victory, but to buy the galaxy time, to scream defiance into the unmaking. At its heart flew the last beacon, a battlecruiser hollowed and reborn, half Imperium, half Craftworld, its interior reshaped by Necron stasis logic and guided by a data soul stitched from a fusion of Tau AI and Psychic Echo. On its bridge stood Robot Guilliman, surrounded by commanders who would once have spat at each other across blood-soaked trenches. Now they stood as one, not in trust, but in shared extinction. The strike force had one target, the origin node. Discovered through temporal drift, buried in a null zone at the edge of the Great Rift, The origin node was a space that did not behave like space. It resisted scrying, resisted augur, resisted even belief. Ships approaching it reported timelines folding inward, memories inverted. One Deathwatch kill team transmitted a single pict capture of the node before it. Dissolved into nothing. A spiral of fractured light and bone, orbiting a shape that was both insectoid and machine, surrounded by shadows of itself in infinite regress. What lay within, no one could say. But all believed this was where Nadir Ouroboros, the worm, the unbecoming, was born. They had a weapon, a desperate, impossible weapon, called the Last Key. It was built from the shattered heart of a Tan shard, the mind core of a long-lost AI god, and a shard of the Emperor's own psychic will. This detonation would not destroy Nadir. It would lock it, seal it, collapse the possibility of its existence back into theoretical space. But to deploy it, someone would have to go inside. The task fell to the Null Vanguard, composed of the Sisters of Silence, alpha-level psychers who had undergone irreversible soul inversion, and the last surviving Kilexis assassin. This team embodied the antithesis of warp presence. They would carry the key into the origin node, protected not by strength but by absence. They were ghosts carrying a coffin. The approach was hell. Ships melted into themselves. Time fractured. The Emperor's tarot flared with unending tower cards. The word-bearer prisoners aboard the Necron-sealed prison barge screamed and turned to dust. Astartes fell to their knees, not from fear, but from memory collapsing. And then the node opened. Not like a gate, like a wound. The fleet poured fire into the abyss, but it swallowed light. Even Blackstone armaments disintegrated before impact. The Null Vanguard descended in silence. Within, the laws of everything died. They saw it, the thing at the center. Not Nadir, but its dream. It dreamed of endings, of stories cut short, of galaxies erased before they began. It did not hate. It did not hunger. It simply wanted there to be nothing left to know. The Null Vanguard fought not with blades, but with memory, holding on to names, to faces, to faiths and songs and lives long gone. Each step took a soul. Each breath cost a century, but they reached the heart, and they planted the key. It sang. A soundless song of resistance, of continuity, of stories unfinished. And the node screamed. The fleet above shattered. Half the Accord burned. The Tau sphere imploded. The Necron stasis vaults cracked. Gilliman fell to one knee as his gene seed howled within him. But the key held. And in one moment, one endless point of convergence, the origin node collapsed. Not destroyed, sealed, bound in paradox, a knot in time that could not be untied. The remnants of the Accord fled. Only fragments survived, but the stars returned. The warp stilled, slightly. The Astronomicon blazed anew, and in the darkness, those who endured looked up and saw, not salvation, but survival. The worm had been caged, but the cage had no lock. And in the silence that followed, a child was born on Terra, beneath the shadow of the Eternity Gate, glowing with light that bent toward no god. The galaxy, for now, endured. In the quiet centuries that followed the sealing of the origin node, the galaxy found a fragile rhythm again. Worlds rebuilt slowly. The scars of Nadir's near ascendance were deep and strange. Whole sectors marked by peculiarities in time's flow, dreams that never ended, and a peculiar light that never dimmed. Yet life persisted. Terra, ever-beating heart of the Imperium, witnessed a cautious rebirth. The Imperial Palace, forever under repair, thrummed with a new vigilance. Even as High Lords rose and fell to political maneuvering, an unspoken understanding threaded the halls of power. The war was not truly over, only paused. Gilliman had long since returned to his fleets, striding through campaigns against raiders and splinter fleets of the great enemy. But he never forgot the origin node, nor the burden carried by the Null Vanguard. Among his most trusted agents, he cultivated a cadre of scholars, psychers, and warriors tasked solely with watching the echoes of Nadir across the stars. Elsewhere, the Eldar's craft worlds danced their eternal pattern, Inari cults spreading whispered hopes of Iniad's next stirrings. Farser Kairis resumed her visions, but they were tinged with uncertainty, as though the strands of fate had been rewound and retied into unfamiliar knots. Even she wondered what future had been permitted to unfold. Necron dynasties, intrigued by the memories of the unbecome thing they had once helped to entrap, invested in research on countless worlds. Time runes and tesseract vaults thrummed with new purpose, though all agreed the matter was dangerous. Trazyn, for his part, displayed fragments of the key's resonance deep within his halls, locked behind containment fields measured in unreal numbers. And the orcs, they rampaged as they always had, though even their most ferocious war bosses paused to stare into the stars more often than they once did, growling about a big fight what never happened yet. The Tyranids adapted as ever, fleet tendrils adjusting their trajectories as if pulled by a tide they could not feel. In the Eye of Terror, a ceaseless dance of demon and mortal continued. The Chaos Gods brooded, resentful of some small shift they could not fully comprehend. Even the most grandiose demons paused and whispered of futures they could not scry. Yet amidst all this, quiet change unfurled in the places no one thought to look. On forgotten worlds where light bent strangely and the soil forever carried a faint resonance, people went about their days strangely soothed. They had forgotten the terror that had nearly consumed them. Farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, and scavengers moved through their lives as though protected by an unseen hand. And deep beneath the eternal sands of Mars, an automated probe sent the last of its data packets to a dying receiver. Its only message, etched into magnolithic circuits, read, "They wait." The galaxy turned in its ancient course, forever changed and forever the same. The eternal war raged on, but all who fought beneath those restless stars knew, whether they dared to admit it or not, the cycle could never truly end. And neither could hope. As centuries unfurled into millennia, the galaxy's fragile balance held. Yet new omens began to stir across the breadth of the Imperium and beyond. Explorators deep in the galactic core uncovered long-buried signals, alien and human both, that whispered of a great disturbance once more approaching the shores of reality. It was not Nadir this time, nor the Tyranids or Chaos, but something far more elusive and insidious. Reports trickled into the offices of the Inquisition like drops of bitter rain. Worlds where history had been rewritten overnight, colonies that vanished without trace as if they never had been. Whole records disappeared from Mechanicus archives. Even the oldest cogitators could not account for these lacunae. Gilliman, his hands never straying far from the reins of leadership, dispatched envoys to seek the counsel of those who survived the origin node. Among them were the few remaining Null Vanguard. Time had aged them strangely. Though centuries had passed, they moved with the somber grace of those who had stared into a universe's death. They spoke in careful tones of an absence they could feel yet could not name, a nothing that existed only where reality had already begun to fray. The Harlequins of the Black Library began to dance new routines, solemn and unpredictable, their kaleidoscopic masks reflecting impossible futures. Within the ghost helm of an Iondan seer ship, a farser collapsed into a trance and rose days later speaking of a distant star that would darken forever at the hands of an unspoken enemy. And in a world that the Imperium had long ago abandoned to myth and superstition, a lone psyker built a circle of warding stones that glowed with a light no warp-touched entity could abide. They whispered to him in dreams of a dark age unborn, of shadows that would reach into time itself. On Holy Terra, the Emperor's light fluctuated like a guttering candle. Tech priests scurried to correct their most sacred machines, to recalculate the alignment of the Astronomicon. Whispers began to circulate among the High Lords as they wrestled with an unpalatable truth, that the struggle against Nadir had left scars deeper than thought, and something was coming through those wounds. And so the galaxy steeled itself once more, in ways seen and unseen, against a threat that had no name. Soldiers raised their arms, scholars lit their lumen tapers in forgotten archives, and prayers rose in every tongue. Some whispered of the Emperor's light as eternal. Others whispered of a new shadow that might last forever. And across the countless worlds and moons and empty spaces, something listened, patient, waiting, ready to begin the next chapter of an age that had never truly ended. Out on the farthest rim of the galaxy, in the borderlands where no charted routes held and the light of the Astronomicon was but a distant whisper, an anomaly began to grow. It was subtle at first, an unplaceable thinning of the veil between matter and thought, like a breeze stirring long-forgotten cobwebs. Traders' vessels bypassed it unknowing. Rogue drones failed mid-flight as their cores whispered alien lullabies and fell into endless drift. This region became a locus of hushed suspicion. Rogue traders hesitated to traverse it. The black ships plotted cautious paths around it. Even the orcs, ever heedless of caution, would scratch their heads and choose an easier fight elsewhere. But someone had noticed. Deep within a grand archive aboard an ancient Arc Mechanicus named Omniscience Ascendant, a Lex Mechanic parsed the data streams until a pattern unfurled like an ink stain across a star chart. The anomaly was moving, not with propulsion or warp surge, but as though the galaxy's skin itself recoiled and stretched. And from its center, a voice emerged in dead codes. "We who were unmade must now unmake you." Messages reached Terra only months later, hurried and incomplete. Watch commanders in their bastions grew unease into action, dispatching kill teams to investigate. Psychers, too, spoke of fleeting dreams they could not bear to recall, swirling with unfathomable shapes and colorless light. As the anomaly crept inward, one world after another fell into eerie silence. Astropaths failed, Vox transmissions ended mid-plea, and when search parties dared to pierce the emptiness, they found only one thing left untouched. The names of every soul who had once lived there, scorched into the rock and soil in perfect High Gothic, glowing with a gentle light like frozen stars. And beneath that strange glow, written in a tongue none could recognize, "The reckoning has begun." And across the endless dark, a subtle answering pulse began to stir in the hearts of the Watchers, an ancient fear they had thought long buried. The light of the galaxy wavered, ever so slightly, as if holding its breath. The last chapter was stirring, and the galaxy felt its breath against its spine. The anomaly deepened its grasp on the galaxy's edges, drawing silent tendrils inward like a tide returning to the shore. Its influence was not overt conquest nor violent consumption, but a slow and inexorable unweaving of the laws that held reality together. Whole sectors drifted into a peculiar twilight. Stellar phenomena changed overnight. Pulsars ceased their rhythm. Nebulae froze into intricate glass, and gravitational streams bent in impossible angles. Astropaths attempting to navigate these regions heard only a gentle, insistent hum that dampened their will. Some never woke. Others spoke in dead dialects of futures that had never happened. In response, the Imperium dispatched their most resolute warriors and scholars. Expeditionary fleets disappeared into the anomaly's periphery like sparks swallowed by the dark. From their final garbled transmissions, a single, recurring phrase emerged. "The gate is opening." And across the shattered moons and dead worlds that marked the anomaly's advance, More names appeared carved into unyielding stone, glowing like distant embers. Beneath them, shapes began to coalesce, a pattern emerging slowly into focus, like the final lines of a sigil etched into the galaxy's very fabric. On Holy Terra, the Emperor's light shuddered once more. Tech priests and psychers alike spoke in hushed tones of an approaching silence that even the Emperor's psychic beacon might not pierce. And far beyond the rim, on worlds too small and too quiet to matter, the scattered remnants of humanity gazed up at a starless sky, sensing the end drawing close like a breath on the back of their necks. Time itself was becoming brittle. Space grew reluctant to hold its shape. And deep within the anomaly's heart, something unfathomable prepared to speak its first true words into existence. The silence that followed was deeper than any known void. Even the ceaseless currents of the Imperium paused as if sensing a turning of some cosmic key. From the center of the anomaly, a soundless resonance unfolded across reality, a ripple that reached into the hidden cracks between worlds and thoughts. The fleets that had disappeared into the anomaly were not destroyed. They had become part of its dream. Time bent into unfamiliar shapes. Warriors fought long-dead battles against enemies who wore their own faces. Psychers screamed without sound as their minds were rewritten into alien symphonies. There was no life as they had known it, nor death as they feared it. There was only transformation. From beyond the anomaly's veil, shapes emerged like blurred memories stepping into focus. Vast and unthinkable, they moved with deliberate purpose, their forms flickering between matter and potential. They were not demons nor Xenos, nor constructs of any mortal forge, but something beyond all such distinctions. And then came the voice, if voice it could be called. It spoke not to ears or minds, but to the very essence of being. A message that unmade the borders of self, promising neither salvation nor annihilation, but the total rewriting of reality's script. All paths converge, all hands must open. What was once scattered must now be gathered. What was closed must now be unsealed. Witness the shape of the final truth and embrace the unbound future. And all across the galaxy, from the Emperor's throne to the forgotten worlds beyond the galactic rim, a shiver ran through every soul that still dared to dream. The last chapter had not yet been written, but the ink was already spilling across the stars. The galaxy held its breath as the resonance deepened into a symphony of uncharted harmonics. Ships, worlds, and minds began to align along strange and alien contours, as if the universe itself were bending to receive a long-forgotten design. Everywhere, subtle and profound shifts took place. Planetary orbits adjusted by immeasurable degrees. Warships on eternal campaigns froze mid-battle, their weapon fire becoming still paintings of light and fury. On Terra, the Emperor's light pulsed with an unfamiliar rhythm, and the golden throne itself groaned beneath the weight of an impossible calculus. The custodes gathered, weapons held tight, and felt a sensation unknown even to their millennia-hardened hearts, an unshakable awe tinged with quiet fear. Throughout the galaxy, disparate species and powers felt the call. Craft worlds glowed with esoteric brilliance as seers and dancers read in their runes the unraveling of everything they had ever known. Even the orcs paused in their battles, sniffing the air as if sensing a new and grander fight just on the cusp of emergence. And the anomaly's shapes began to coalesce into an entity, a grand convergence of all that had been fragmented across eternity. Its nature was not of flesh nor energy nor spirit. It was something wholly other, as if the very concept of form was redefined in its presence. The voice that spoke before whispered again, an undertone that reverberated in the marrow of all things. The time of veils is ended. Truths shall dance naked. Let all who live bear witness, and those who dare not gaze into this becoming shall find their worlds forever closed. And so, As an entire galaxy stood poised on the brink of an impossible new reality, a final hush fell. The ancient games were ending. The players would either embrace this strange ascension or vanish into its brilliance forever. And beneath all sound, beneath all light, the final shape began to emerge. The convergence began in full as the anomaly's power unfolded like a billion unfurling banners across the expanse of the galaxy. A cascade of colorless light, neither bright nor dark, flowed across star systems, sweeping worlds into an ethereal embrace. Reality itself became fluid. Where the light touched, the walls between matter and thought grew transparent. Beings caught in its tide experienced a profound unbinding. Memories flowed into one another, futures merged with pasts, and identities dissolved into vast, shared symphonies of awareness. In the farthest reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, a desolate starfield erupted into new geometries. Entire constellations shifted, weaving together into a sigil so vast that its purpose could not yet be understood. To look upon it was to perceive the faint outline of an impossible design reaching beyond the veil of the galaxy itself. On countless worlds, warriors and innocents alike laid down their arms as one, sensing the immensity of what was unfolding. Even the most fervent zealots of the Emperor paused in their litanies, voices choked with awe and terror, as they felt his light blending into the greater rhythm of this unknown power. Deep in the eye of terror, the gods of chaos recoiled, their monstrous laughter stilled for the first time in eons as the new force threaded itself into the bleeding heart of the Imperium. And as all hearts quickened to a single rhythm and all minds bent toward a single emergence, the final pieces of the grand pattern slid into place. The anomaly was no longer an anomaly, it was becoming the galaxy's truth and promise. And when the last note of its silent hymn reverberated across all existence, a single voice, calm and ineffable, spoke into the unbounded dark. Behold, the work is done. Let the new reality be born. And so the new reality began to unfurl, its tendrils reaching into every crevice of the galaxy. Unburdened by the strictures that had once governed matter and spirit alike, worlds and stars found themselves remade according to unfamiliar principles. New worlds blossomed in the dark voids where none had been, and old worlds glowed with strange energies, their inhabitants awed and uncomprehending. In the heart of Holy Terra, the Emperor's golden light changed, suffused with a gentler hue as if tinged by the ungraspable essence that had rewritten existence. Those who knelt before the golden throne felt an inexplicable peace alongside their devotion, a sense that the long vigil was shifting toward a profound and hopeful renewal. The Primarchs, scattered across countless crusades and campaigns, paused as one. They felt the resonance deep within their gene seed, stirring old bonds and forging new connections. Robot Gilliman himself gazed at the stars and whispered a prayer of thanks that felt less like supplication and more like a greeting to an old friend long awaited. Even the Eye of Terror, its churning chaos quelled for the first time since its creation, held a tranquil surface. Demons paused mid-howl, uncertain and strangely subdued. The gods of the warp, for all their terrible power, found themselves held in balance. Their eternal war paused as if by an unseen hand. And across the myriad worlds of humanity and beyond, a new accord began to shape itself. Alliances once thought impossible glimmered into existence. Former foes spoke in hushed tones of new futures that did not demand the death of their adversaries. The galaxy was no longer a crucible of endless strife. It was a canvas upon which a gentler story was beginning to be painted. Even those who resisted this great becoming felt its call, a melody sung across the spaces between stars and souls alike. And so, into the hush of this dawn, countless beings took their first steps into a reality forever changed, forever united by the light of a new and boundless tomorrow. As the gentle tide of the new reality washed further into the corners of existence, phenomena once thought impossible began to emerge. Whole star clusters sang gentle, harmonious tones that could soothe even the most turbulent minds. Spaces that had been scarred by endless wars began to green with bioluminescent flora, reclaiming burnt soil and shattered cities in waves of quiet rebirth. The Eldar, feeling the subtle caress of this unfolding existence in their very soul stones, whispered of an ancient prophecy stirring anew, a final weaving of the threads of fate that wove together all races into a grander pattern than they had dared to dream. Even the dark Eldar, caught up in the weaving, felt a strange aching in their twisted hearts, an unfamiliar compassion stirring like embers. The Necrons paused their ceaseless calculations as the dream of ages past brushed their metallic minds. Tomb worlds, so long silent and sleeping, hummed with an unfamiliar warmth as they responded to the call of this new symphony. Some dynasties began to stir, not to conquer, but to understand. In the ever-shifting heart of the warp, entities born of pure thought paused in their ravenous chase and listened. Threads of light ran through the Imperium, stabilizing the currents, bringing a gentle order that had never before been witnessed. Even the gods themselves watched with a cautious awe, sensing a pivot they had neither orchestrated nor anticipated. And far from the grand conflicts and titanic figures of the past, simple beings across countless worlds paused in their daily labors, sensing a lightness to the air, a fleeting touch of purpose and togetherness that they could not name but could feel. Beneath a sky alive with quiet wonders, all began to move as one, toward a future that none had written, yet all had wished for in the secret places of their hearts. With the galaxy embracing its newfound harmony, an age of profound discovery began. Beacons of light flickered into existence on worlds long forgotten, their illumination spreading across the stars like a radiant web of connection. Astropathic choirs, once burdened by the weight of unrelenting peril, now sang in harmonious concord, their messages bearing news of unexpected alliances and gentle revelations. Among the scattered worlds of the Segmentum Pacificus, human and Xenos envoys walked together across verdant parks and shining spires. They spoke of shared histories and futures intertwined, of knowledge to be exchanged and wounds to be healed. Beneath the sheltering boughs of ancient alien trees, warriors who had fought 100 wars set aside their arms and listened to the murmur of the wind, sensing that it spoke of beginnings rather than ends. And deep within the sacred vaults of Mars, the Omnissia's priests uncovered mechanisms that had long slumbered in anticipation of this moment. Data spirals unfolded intricate codes that hinted at technologies neither of war nor dominance, but of restoration and creativity. Forges long tasked with ceaseless armament began crafting instruments of light and sound, opening new chapters in the story of their divine work. In the fading light of long-dimmed nebulae, the whisper of the galaxy spoke clearly at last, drawing together all who dwelled beneath its myriad suns. It was a call to venture beyond the past, to embrace the myriad possibilities waiting at the threshold of this new and gentle dawn. And as countless hearts answered that call, they felt the quiet joy of being part of a galaxy that, after endless strife, had chosen a path of wonder and renewal. As the years unfolded into a gentle epoch, the galaxy blossomed with the richness of newfound unity. Grand councils convened on worlds that glowed with promise, their halls echoing with earnest dialogue and shared aspirations. Technologies once bent to destruction were repurposed to sustain and elevate life, spreading comfort across worlds where hardship had long been an unyielding specter. In the realm of the Eldari, the path of unity took its place alongside ancient paths, and the seers spoke in measured tones of futures threaded with light and possibility. Even the most reclusive craft worlds emerged to participate in the grand weaving of destinies, sharing their elegant craft and luminous artistry with all who would listen. Elsewhere, In the worlds where the greenskins roamed, a curious peace settled over the tribes. Instinctive as they were, the orcs sensed a mighty horizon approaching, not one of battle and conquest, but of grand competition and spectacle. Thunderous roars and hearty laughter echoed as they prepared to shape their energies into feats of engineering, racing machines and games of strength that would rival the most elaborate pageants. Beneath countless suns, the Terrans and all the diverse peoples of the galaxy carried on with open hands and hopeful hearts. Farmers tilled rejuvenated soils, engineers sketched blueprints for cities that soared and shimmered, and dreamers charted courses to new worlds that glowed like beacons in the warm embrace of the cosmos. And through it all, a subtle hum pervaded reality, a melody that spoke of enduring harmony and boundless creativity. The dark age of endless war had yielded to a bright and endless tomorrow, and within that light, the galaxy thrived, whole and forever changed. Within this dawning era of unity and exploration, the galaxy began to embrace a new kind of discovery. Starships roamed the depths of uncharted space with a sense of purpose beyond conquest. Their hulls glimmered with emblems of countless worlds, each voyage dedicated to uncovering the shared mysteries of the cosmos and forging connections where isolation had once reigned. On the agri-worlds of Ultramar, bountiful harvests were celebrated in festivals that drew visitors from 100 different species. Farmers and ecologists worked together to cultivate the land in ever more harmonious ways, and schoolchildren listened in awe as they were told tales of long-ago conflicts resolved by compassion and insight. Far to the galactic north, the Iron Hands pioneered new interfaces between flesh and machine that honored the sanctity of both. Reverent workshops filled with light and sound resonated with the hum of synthesis as craftspeople designed and built marvels that could heal, uplift, and empower. And even in the farthest reaches of the Eastern Fringe, where worlds once fought bitterly for resources, those same worlds now extended hands in partnership. Trade routes opened like silken strands between glowing ports, and treaties ensured that all peoples could thrive without fear. As these bonds strengthened, a deeper rhythm thrummed through reality itself, a rhythm that spoke of endurance and shared purpose. In this grand and vibrant symphony, the galaxy moved together as one vast organism, every soul a vital note in its great unfolding song. And through the stellar winds and warm nebulae, the light of this newfound harmony spread ever outward, a luminous herald of futures yet to be written. As centuries turned to millennia under this banner of harmony, the galaxy became a crucible for transformative innovation. Communities of scholars and explorers charted the very edges of what was thought possible, unlocking secrets that had slept in the hearts of dying stars and the gentle cradles of nebulae. From the shipyards of Jupiter to the observatories of Iondon, collaborative teams bent the light of new knowledge into shapes both subtle and grand. Ships of shimmering crystal and iridescent metals glided between worlds on pathways paved by understanding and trust. They carried emissaries who spoke in the many tongues of peace, and who returned home bearing seeds of enlightenment gathered from every corner of existence. Ancient rivalries dissolved into tales told at council fires and in the halls of study. Even the most fiercely independent warriors found common ground, training together to protect the fragile wonder that had become their shared inheritance. Every victory was measured not in conquest but in the flourishing of worlds that now burst into vivid bloom beneath careful hands and thoughtful minds. And across the dream-filled nights and light-dappled days, the hum of a universe reunited never faded. Its gentle resonance reached into every soul and star, telling of a galaxy that had learned to listen to itself and to grow forevermore into the boundless expanse of possibility. And so the age of rebirth unfolded with gentle strength, unfurling its future like a banner across the great dark, a future in which all could stand together, hands clasped across the limitless span of eternity. And so the galaxy stood at the cusp of an unending horizon, forever changed by the trials and triumphs that had shaped its path. What had once been an eternity of war and sorrow had blossomed into an epic of understanding, resilience, and gentle stewardship. Beneath countless suns and across countless worlds, the peoples of the galaxy reached toward one another with hands that no longer gripped weapons, but instruments of creation and joy. Ancient bastions of the past, Terra with its eternal light, Macridge with its indomitable spirit, craft worlds alight with song. Even the worlds that had long slept in the dark thrummed in harmonious accord. Across the Imperium, the currents had calmed into streams of thought and dream that cradled all who dared to look beyond themselves. Even the gods of old paused their ceaseless games, moved by the gentle tide of a destiny neither dictated nor denied, but earned together. As new generations rose beneath the brilliance of 1,000 banners intertwined, they learned the tales of struggle and the light that emerged beyond it. They built and sang and soared to places uncharted, forever guided by the sacred knowledge that peace, too, was worthy of valor. Together they embarked on voyages not of conquest, but of wonder, and in every glimmering trail across the dark expanse, they left behind the hopeful promise that all could endure, all could grow, all could thrive. And so, with a future painted in the colors of compassion and discovery, the grand saga of the galaxy reached its gentle, radiant close, a forever opening chapter in the great story of existence itself.